Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to our CRMKonvos. And today we have at least two surprises to our regular audience. Which are regularly dropping by know that we are normally something like the Three Musketeers with our guests. Now we changed a bit the setup as Thomas and Marshall are not here yet, but I am very happy to have our guest Matthias Hohensee and as special surprise, our dear friend John Reed. Hi, two of you. So, guys, let me stop the introduction part to a certain that I don't get too much distracted about the setup. Matthias is aware, John, that you are the friend of the house, to say so, and that it is a big pleasure and a great pleasure, all in all, to have you both on the show and that exciting topics we are going to touch. As the regular viewer knew you a bit better, John, I will start to introduce Matthias. Matthias is a US correspondent of Wirtschaftswoche and has lived in the Silicon Valley since 1998, which is quite some time. There, he has observed and is observing the rise of companies such as Yahoo, eBay, Google, and Facebook, and has interviewed almost every influential internet entrepreneur. He was awarded the Georg von Holtzbrinck Prize for Business Journalism for his reports on Google and Silicon Valley entrepreneur Andreas von Berchtoldsheim. Now, by saying that, one has to know that Wirtschaftswoche is something in the range of Business Week, The Economist, Forbes, and it's really a pacemaker if you want to be on the informed side on economics, not only European one, but especially German one. And you could say that there are some colleagues which are working in a similar setup, which are in the same group of publishers, the Holtzbrinck group, and that is the Handelsblatt group and the Handelsblatt daily newspaper, which is also going into stock exchange and all that stuff. Now, we have some interesting topics, and I would like to give first Matthias the opportunity to say something about himself and where he lives, and then we go over to John.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, hi Ralph, hi John. It's really nice to be here today. Thank you for the opportunity and also for the kind introduction. So as Ralph mentioned, I have been here in the Silicon Valley for the last 26 years. It was supposed to be only 3 to 5 years, but once you are in California, and I live now in Santa Cruz, so it's really hard to leave. And it's also for a journalist it is as exciting as ever. I mean, what is going now with artificial intelligence or generative artificial intelligence really reminds me what it was like when I arrived in the Silicon Valley in the fall of 1998. Then, if you remember the dot-com area that was in full swing, everybody talked about how the internet would change the future of everybody. And I remember talking to Scott McNealy, the CEO of Sun Microsystems, who told me that this company was basically overvalued, but he couldn't do anything against it. And Sun Microsystems servers were in such hot demand that Sun got offers for equity in startups if they supplied those machines to startups. And of course, I mean, we are seeing parallels today where NVIDIA is investing into sought after startups, giving them Hopper systems for equity. And yeah, I think we're going to later touch on that. But we all know that's a dot-com bubble that blew up like crazy, and then it popped in 2000, which was the demise of more than 130, I think, dot-com companies alone in the United States. And I get a lot of questions. So I had a presentation last week about Gen AI. And the question is basically always, are there similarities to the dot-com area? And I would say yes and no. Yes, because there is a lot of hype. And I think some of it will need more time than people expect, especially in terms of productivity gains and introducing AI or Gen AI to the workplace and figuring out what the best tools are. I also know because the popping in 2000 of the dot-com bubble was so impactful because a lot of the companies were publicly listed on the stock exchange. And you remember that retail investors, they lost a lot of money.
Yeah.
And I don't see an IPO search at the moment at Gen AI. So I don't see it coming yet. And the dot-com bubble also created a lot of new companies, independent companies like Amazon and eBay. And I doubt that we will see a Gen AI giant in itself, because as you know, most of the LLM providers are already part of big tech companies now. So I think it will be very different. And of course, you could argue that we see some of this bubbling and valuation like companies like NVIDIA. So NVIDIA is going to have their quarterly earnings tomorrow. So let's see how the current quarter works. But I am a little bit reluctant to describe it to the hype cycle. I mean, in my experience, history never plays out the same way. And before we start the session, Ralph and John, so please take everything that I say with a grain of salt. I might be totally wrong. And I'm more a generalist. I mean, for Wirtschaftswoche, I cover all the industry from biotech to defense to CRM. And I'm not a CRM guru like you, Ralph or John. So I cannot match your knowledge. I can only give you some of my observations.
That's fine. So, John, over to you. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and that you sorted your calendar to our advantage. And as it reads John ERP, I know John firstly from the ERP side, and then at several events when it was not only ERP, but more than that, and CRM. I learned how knowledgeable he is also in that territory and on such topics like economical developments. And being an entrepreneur has covered a lot of stuff. And now I give you the floor and give us a little intro and some first feedbacks on Matthias' observations.
Cool. Well, first of all, it's great to be here. And yeah, I'm about 11 years into Diginomica, and we focus on issues of transformation in the enterprise. And one thing that I think is so fascinating about this conversation, Matthias, is that I'm not Silicon Valley at all. I'm based in the Northeast U.S., Massachusetts. I spend very little time in Silicon Valley, and I think it's fair to say that I'm almost anti-Silicon Valley in certain ways, like because I'm not really a venture capitalist in my thinking about markets, but obviously Silicon Valley has been enormously influential, not just for consumer, but enterprise software. And so this show is going to really be more about exploring your views than mine, but I think I will take a couple minutes to share a few of my views right now, because I think it may kind of help frame the discussion a little bit. And what we look at is the impact of Silicon Valley on actual customer results, and how customers are using technology to serve their customers better and hopefully create better businesses. And I'd like to think more life-affirming businesses that make life on this planet a little bit better, which is one of my criteria for success, not just what's the most profitable thing to come out of Silicon Valley. So I look for like what's really impacting people's lives for the better, and why aren't we using technologies like this, for example, to solve pressing medical problems, pressing problems in food supply and energy. And it's not like it's not happening, but it seems like a lot of the sexy ideas are more like, hey, can we build another TikTok, but do it in this way? And and how many viral walled gardens do we actually need? But one thing I would say right off the bat is that I think that what distinguishes, I like the internet analogy with AI precisely because I do believe that over time, just like when you kind of connect internet and mobile and say like this all kind of connects, and like this has had a lasting impact on culture, society, and business. And I think AI will as well over time. Whether that will satisfy investors and markets on their short-term timeframes remains to be seen, and that's really the crux. It's more a matter of timing, I think, than anything. But I do want to point out, Matthias, one very interesting dynamic that makes AI different, in my opinion, from some of the other things you've covered, which is that the impact of AI actually affects you. You can't just be a neutral observer in this. AI affects information flow. It affects the consumption of information. It affects whether or not you or I have a profession in 5 or 10 years from now. Now, the good news is someone of your caliber and experience, you're probably going to be fine, but there's a lot of media people that are, and writers and content producers that are experiencing a tough time right now. And what we have seen is a real decline, I think, in the promise of the original internet and the sort of open web and exchange of ideas in favor of these, contained walled gardens that are driven by algorithmic business models. And when you splash generative AI driven content on top of that, I think the exchange of ideas is actually threatened by these technologies. And so I would point out that's one of the interesting things about this is it's not just something you report on. This is actually going to affect your business and your livelihood. And I think that's what makes this really compelling and important, because in theory, we should be the ones that are influencing where all of this goes and trying to take it in a better direction that serves the needs of your readers and serves the world at large. And so that's kind of my overall framing of the issues, but I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, because CRMKonvos people have heard my views on this before, and if they don't know them, they can check the archives because I've been here. So I'm really looking forward to hearing from you, Matthias, in terms of like how you see these things, because I think it's fascinating how you are essentially an embedded reporter in all of this. So it's fantastic to talk with you.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, John. And I totally agree. I mean, as a journalist, I'm totally impacted. I just finished a story about a company called Prorata, so Bill Gross in Pasadena. So he is trying to find a system how to get creators paid for all the information that is used in the training of AI models. And Bill Gross, I met him almost like 15 years ago. He was very famous in the middle of the 90s because he came up with a pay per click model, so the first business model for search engine, so to say. And I think it's going to be very, very impactful on the media industry, and hopefully we will still exist in the next 10 years, because media is also very important, I think, for the functioning of democracies. And of course, we are observers, but we are, as you pointed out, we are impacted as well. And I like to use ChatGPT and Claude and all those models also in my work, but I also take it with a grain of salt, because for me it's like I'm getting older, so my memory is not as good as it was, and I usually I use the chatbots just to refresh my memory, and often they come up with wrong information that I immediately know that is not true, that is not correct. And for me, that's helpful. But I just wonder, let's see, you have a younger colleague that's just starting out, and then he takes all this information as a fact. And then you poison the wells, so to say, because it gets distributed everywhere. So I think that's a real danger. And I mean, we already survived the search engine. Can the media industry survive Gen AI? I think we can, when we use the tools also for our advantage. And still there are a lot of challenges. So a friend of mine, he is a publisher of a very large German media outlet. So I think, because I haven't told him, so I cannot tell you the name of it, but they were using AI, Gen AI, actually in writing of stories, and they stopped it. So they're using it still in the economic section, but not in the politics sections anymore, because the AI came up with a story about the fascist Ukraine and how the fascist Ukraine is basically asking for weapons. And so it turns out that the model was apparently fed with a lot of Russian propaganda, and so and couldn't really distinguish. yeah, it's a very exciting time. So I'm really reminded of the dot-com area, and I mean, in the hindsight, it's always depicted as something bad, but it was actually a really great time. I mean, I remember when I started out as a journalist in the middle of the 90s as a business journalist, I was wondering, so who is going to pay for all the infrastructure, the internet infrastructure we need? So, and are the telecom companies are going to pay for that, or is the government paying for it? And then it turns out private money was paying for it. And of course, we had the popping of the bubble, but it was not like there was nothing left standing. So we had that great infrastructure later to build on and generate new companies and everything. And my hope is that we're going to see the same with artificial intelligence, that maybe the companies are over investing right now. I mean, for sure, some of them do, but it's something that's not going to be destroyed. It's something that's there, that's going to be used. So I'm very optimistic and I'm very hopeful.
That's likely to be a nice handover to John again, such as John shared some perspective on creating a better world. And if we see some of the players which have also not only the utilization and get their users and customers accessing to their advantage their certain approach to AI, but also some of the players, one you have interviewed, has Planet Earth and green IT and challenges in going for cautious utilization of the energy and the environment and water consumption. Such things do touch, if you on one end build more data centers, consumer energy, need more water for cooling, and the other side, where are the trade-offs? Yeah. So, John, what is your observation in what we have touched recently a bit in the not always correct answers of the systems, and what is happening, what Wirtschaftswoche, Handelsblatt, and the Valley Talk addressed as well, that there is a lot of fake information coming across in the recent last weeks?
So it's a mixed bag, because the fact that these are probabilistic systems that are sometimes inaccurate creates a lot of danger and problems, and also return on investment issues, because they require designs that need human supervision. Now, having said that, some companies ignore that and press on. I think Matthias sort of referred to that already, and get into trouble and get bad headlines, and we're going to see a lot of that. And I call that AI overreach, and it happens all the time. And the tools end up getting blamed, but ironically, it's not the tools, it's the misuse of those tools that is the core problem there. The one thing I think we can be kind of happy about is that while these are very troubling things, especially for disinformation, because the tools are very good enough for that, if these tools were perfect, then the effect on employment would be vast. And now we have a window of, I think, considerable time. You could say how much time. I think it's more like 10 or 20 years, but we could debate that. But to plan for the time when these tools don't have those problems. But that's going to require some significant breakthroughs, because they're not cognitive systems. And that's what a lot of people don't understand, is that you can't just, for a while, people thought, well, just train more and more data and we'll have it. Well, that's super expensive, and we're kind of out of data, and it doesn't work. Like, the scale doesn't make these systems that much smarter, and that's what we're seeing. That's what OpenAI is experiencing. That's why they're pushing back release dates on things. And anyway, so there's a lot of complications there. But the one thing I will say is that what gets interesting for companies is there are ways of adding technology to these tools to make the results more specific to customers and companies. And that's why the enterprise part of this discussion gets a little bit obscured sometimes, because people are playing with these consumer grade tools that don't have a lot of that. But I won't get into all the technologies now, but when you combine things like retrieval augmented generation, which customizes a prompt to specific data at times and what you're asking and says, hey, only return an answer that has this kind of data in it. And then you tie it into things like knowledge graphs, which show correlations between kinds of information. Now suddenly enterprises can look at that, and these systems aren't perfect, but it gives better data. And anyway, so that's interesting. And I suppose that, Matthias, in your research, you probably talk with all kinds of companies that are quote unquote innovating on this stuff and trying to make it deliver a good result for their customers. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on to make these tools more accurate.
I would like to touch the area of the economical impact and the share of observation, such the drive it is taking from the stock exchange, that some companies are having exceptional earnings and some companies did profit to a certain extent. You mentioned NVIDIA already, and I was asking myself if we could have a quick jump into the observation. If we go into the market, if all data centers have been served in selling some chips, what's coming next? Yeah, who's buying whom and who are investing where? And I see that, for instance, NVIDIA is nearly serving all data centers, and I mean they have been served. Where and whom do they sell to? What is your take on that, Matthias?
I think that's still a long time away. I think at least for the next 5 or 10 years, I don't see the problem at all. Given that Gen AI is accepted and we see further development, I think we are going to see that. So the companies I'm speaking to, they are trying out tools. I mean, still, I think that I saw a statistic like 5 or 6 or 7% of companies overall are using AI tools. So we are in the very early beginning. But once they are actually finding out ways to use that for productivity gains, then I think we are going to see an upgrade of data centers for the next 5 to 10 years. And I don't see any problems for NVIDIA at all. I mean, they can serve their market. They can still serve the gaming market as well. They can serve the Bitcoin market. So if they are going to grow as fast as they have been in the past, I mean, it's amazing. I haven't seen something like that before. I mean, if you look at the numbers of NVIDIA, so I think this year in data center revenue, analysts expect, like $105 billion in revenue. And so we had like last year, it was like, I think 40 or 50 billion in data center revenue. So, I mean, imagine, and then most of it, or I think half of it is profit. It's unbelievable what is going on there. So just amazing. I don't think they can continue. That's what I'm getting from also players in the industry that are saying, well, I mean, at one point we have to stop a little bit and we have to look at other companies as well. I know that companies are also buying AMD systems, not only because they are available, but also because they don't want to be dependent only on NVIDIA. And of course, AMD, so they have to compete over the price because they cannot manage performance, at least not at the moment. But if you look at the numbers, so I already mentioned it, NVIDIA, $105 billion expected revenue this fiscal year. And then I think AMD is like 5 billion. And I don't know, Intel is like 4 or something like that. So and then you have like, of course, you have Google, Tensor, and Microsoft and with their own solutions. So there is NVIDIA and then there is nothing. But I think we need competitors. And you see that AMD is actually already buying up companies like ZT Systems to get the knowledge, basically to compete. And then also, I think the most important part also will be the software. Most people don't know that NVIDIA is so powerful because they have that CUDA software in the market for 20 years now. I think John and Ralph, I think you know more about that than me, but they can deliver a complete system. We are always in the press, we are talking about chips and NVIDIA chips and AMD chips, but it's a whole system. So it's not only a chip, it's a whole system, and it's software, so it has to play into each other.
The only thing I would just quickly add is that this AI bubble discussion is a real thing. It was significant a month ago when a bunch of investment firms, including Goldman Sachs, published formal documents raising questions around what the real return on these systems are. So don't be surprised if you do see some short-term, by short-term I mean the next year or so, hits for NVIDIA, because a lot of what investors are saying is, we'll reward you if you keep up the exact same pace. I agree with Matthias in the long run that the demand will be there as companies continue to invest, but there could be some short-term shenanigans because folks are counting on a higher level of return, but the fact of the matter is the only companies that have made huge amounts of money on Gen AI are NVIDIA and the hyperscalers, and that's it. If you look, for example, at the retail sector, the leading retailers aren't soaring because of generative AI, and there's no sector you can point to where the top companies are soaring. So that's what the bubble talk is about. It's not about whether AI delivers value. It's about investors and markets. And don't be surprised if there is a little bit of a cold shower coming up a little bit for that based on the current rates.
Absolutely, John, you are right. And I know the Goldman Sachs piece, and I can really recommend it. It's publicly on the internet.
It's quite good.
It's quite good. So it's more, it's not research. Classical research is more like a magazine approach. So I think the author was talking to also the MIT professor and several experts. So I really liked it. Really nice piece, a balanced piece also, and it caused a lot of stir, not only in the Silicon Valley. And I remember the quote from Jim Coviello, who is the head of global equity research at Goldman Sachs, and he basically stated that AI, in his opinion, is not designed to solve complex problems, and even the summarizing, so easy stuff, is underwhelming at the moment. And funny thing was that the Goldman Sachs CEO, David Solomon, so he came later out and said, no, there is no bubble in AI. This is something long-term that will affect business productivity. So he was a little bit backpedaling, but he, or let's say he was stating what that it is about long-term. It's not about the stock market and short-term.
Right, but both things can be true, right? Like, so there was an internet bubble, but the internet also had long-term impact, and I think the same is true of AI. There is a bubble, but it will still have long-term impact. We need to figure out how to have that full conversation, right?
Absolutely.
And the interesting aspect is, because I was finger-pointing a bit on the chip makers and the technology companies, which are also creating the tools we're working with, such as the laptops, the desktops, and the workstations and the phones. That is interesting to see what is left in market share for Samsung, Intel, and AMD. AMD have taken a point. You mentioned Google with the Tensor chip, and as long as they go forward with the Tensor chip and go forward to produce stuff by themselves, the Pixel phone will have a certain frame and market to exist. I own one as well, and from my end, it was a side of two other phones. So I'm the gadget man in my family. I have 5 to 6 phones and 3 already in service, and the eldest one is an Apple and a small one. So I was wondering, as Apple's built-in AI, I had a nice discussion and discourse with Thomas on that, who is a hardcore Apple fan, and he loves his Apple gear and says, yeah, well, if you see what security functions are still existing inside that machines, and that they have a lot of built-in capabilities in security and artificial intelligence utilization, and they had already done a lot on co-processors or dedicated AI processors in the machines, it's just a moment of time when they jump onto the train. And we have that Apple Intelligence as AI abbreviation coming around the corner. Have you heard and observed anything on that, gentlemen?
You want to start, John, or?
No, you go for it. I'll chime in.
Okay, so yeah, so I'm basically here next door neighbor to Apple, and we're gonna have the next iPhone coming out on September 10. And right now it's basically all the smartphone companies, so they already have a big penetration in the market. So you mentioned, Ralph, that you have like 6 smartphone devices already. So they are, and the upgrade cycle is longer than it used to be, and now all of them hoping for AI basically to create a new super upgrade cycle. And Samsung came out in January with their offerings, and then we had the Google Pixel, and now Apple is coming out. And yeah, with Apple, it's like I think they lost a little bit direction. They underestimated AI, and I know some people that work at Apple, and I think Apple was putting more emphasis on Apple Vision Pro, on so basically augmented reality, and then also they thought about developing a car, and now they are all focused on artificial intelligence. And right now, I think they are behind, but it doesn't have to stay that way. I think the big advantage they're having is so the installed base of all the iPhones and the iPads and the Macs out there, which is a direct interface to at least to the consumer. I think John already pointed out at the beginning, I mean, we are all consumers as well, but there's a difference between a consumer tool and then a business or enterprise tool.
Yeah.
But they're going to have, I think, a big advantage in that if they use it. And I think right now it's actually a good decision to work with OpenAI and to look for partners, because they need time. So I think Tim Cook, he bought himself some time, and also they can basically study the market. So what will work, what will not work, and they are not putting tens of billions of dollars into data center or into their own LLM. And I think the LLM, Apple's own LLM, I don't see the advantage they could have. So I think right now it's the best they could do. So just bring out Apple Intelligence, trying to test the market. And I know some people inside Apple personally, and of course they're not allowed to talk about what they're working on. But some of them told me, well, it's actually not that easy. It's actually quite complicated. And Apple also is selling those privacy notion. I mean, that's the whole brand about privacy and data protection. So, and how to bring that together and then work with OpenAI. OpenAI doesn't have the best reputation, so to say, in data privacy and security. So it's going to be really interesting what Apple will deliver, and what the expectations are, and what they will actually offer.
So that was such a comprehensive answer. I don't have a whole lot to add, but I will say that I think that you're right that Apple was slow on this for some reasons that are kind of good in a way, because Apple's positioning was a lot more around data privacy. And the thing about today's AI tools is that if they're really going to deliver more value than just entertainment, like screwing around with a chatbot on a weekend, they have to have access to more of your data. So, for example, I have a friend who had a good career development session with OpenAI's tools. But the reason he did is because he did a much more in-depth skills assessment on his own using a system called Strength Finder. So he had a bunch of data to feed the system. As a result, he got some pretty sophisticated information back. If you don't have something to put in that really is interesting, have fun getting something really useful out of it. And so the thing about Apple is that Apple has a massive captive audience of people that use their devices, and they're not going to throw those devices out just because Siri sucks. You know, they're going to keep using those devices, even though everyone makes fun of Siri, right? So Apple has this opportunity, and as you pointed out, what they're doing is they're doing device-specific AI, so they're not taking your data and putting it into the cloud, and that's how they're trying to reconcile this privacy commitment with moving ahead on AI, because obviously all the data on your phone is right there for personalizing a bunch of stuff for you, and make having an assistant at your fingertips and all of this stuff is supposedly going to change our lives for the better and compensate for all the deep fakes and everything we have to put up with to try to find something real. Supposedly we're going to get all this personalized assistants that are going to magically transform our day-to-day existence. And so Apple's on board that train now, and let's see how far it goes. But I think you're totally right to point out that OpenAI is a very awkward strategic partner at best for Apple under these circumstances if they're really committed to privacy like they continue to claim. I would not have picked OpenAI as the poster child for that. So, it's early days, but they're going to need, I think, to think through their technology partner strategy a little bit.
As you both have touched the payoff a bit, I wanted to make a crude jump, such as one who is very proud of his iPhone and was claiming since ages, what do you need more than such a smartphone? And he's living in San Francisco. He's having his home party just some weeks coming up this next 2 weeks, the Dreamforce. And Mark Benioff is something you could say it's tearing me between the good and the bad, such as there are things I really embrace and I'm quite impressed. And other things I say, oh man, just go to your corner. And that is that he is the one which were running around in his show rooms and in his conferences and claiming to the audience, I can steer my whole company with that smartphone and the utilization of my software, because it's so good that it helps me bring together a lot of stuff. Now, you had the pleasure to be in the situation that you could interview Clara Shih, and she is a very charming and knowledgeable person. And she was brought up to the light, let's say, with the Summer of AI, the big show momentum last year, summertime, June, when Salesforce drove that, let's say, attack to the rest of the market, said, hey guys, we have covered now trusted layer. We have brilliant minds. We have done a lot with Einstein. Now it's your turn to run behind our fast TGV train and try to catch up, guys and girls. Gentlemen, what's your take on where we have right now? You firsthand, Matthias, in the interview with Clara, what were the most interesting parts where you said, oh, that made me think, and that was surprising, and that I didn't expect. Swans and roses.
Yeah. So I'm a little bit of a disadvantage because I am not a CRM guru, but of course I've known Mark Benioff for 20 years now. I still remember when Dreamforce only had like a couple of hundred attendants, and then it evolved into that big company. And I mean, Mark, he is a master of marketing. I mean, no questions about that. I mean, he came up very early with Einstein, so puts the Einstein label on everything. I think it was back in 2016 when he introduced it at the Dreamforce conference. And I think that was genius because most people can basically relate to Einstein, so they know how smart he was. And back then, of course, we called it data science, or we called it deep learning or machine learning. And now everything is about Gen AI. And I think Mark also admitted that he was a little bit surprised about that, even though he is neighbors with Sam Altman, and they're having apparently dinner together. And I mean, he is really a master marketing guy, and he is always able to find the newest trends and use it to his advantage. And I think they were already working on Gen AI as well. So I know Richard Socher, who was the chief software architect. He has his own company now in the Gen AI space, and I think he came to Salesforce when they bought MetaMind, so his company. And they did some acquisitions also, I think Relate IQ to collect workplace information. So I think they have a lot of the so-called infrastructure and software that they need. They already have that. And I think it was also a very good move to create that position for someone to oversee AI for the whole company. And that person you already mentioned, Ralph, is Clara Shih. And I think I asked her what her title is, and she actually didn't say CEO of AI. She said, yeah, I'm actually like an EVP. And I joked, yeah, that's actually good for you because so co-CEOs of Salesforce, they don't live long. I mean, we all know Keith Block and what happened. So, I mean, Mark Benioff tires of them and then they are out. But I was kind of really impressed by her. I think she is a really smart person. So she knows the market. She had her own company before. And she has to do something with it. And so Dreamforce is coming up, and hopefully Mark will also give some insights how AI is driving the business. Because I pointed out to Clara, I said, well, I cannot see it in your numbers. So if AI is such a force, so why is the revenue higher? And she said, well, we don't break it down right now in numbers, but there is a big impact. So that she was claiming. And I'm hoping that Mark will give us some more information, either at the next quarterly earnings or at Dreamforce. And so it's, I mean, for a company like Salesforce, it's perfect. I mean, they have the data. It makes sense, basically, to use all those data for the sales process. You can even claim that you get something out of it because, I mean, in the end, it's end of the day, it's like, okay, did it really help me to get new customers and to have higher revenue? I think you can really measure it, and I think that's a big advantage they have or they don't have. I mean, if it shows that there's no revenue hike or no productivity gain, so then of course we're going to have a different discussion.
The fairy tales, which in the marketing bubble story are often told, are one of the sides of Mark. The other thing is that he has the right nose for some trends and the right people to, like the Borg, to assimilate and get them into his team and not into a different team. And then the next challenge is coming up, such as how to keep them happy and productive to deliver what he was dreaming of and what he thought, and his nose told him that it might go in that direction. So I was looking for the AI killer application coming together with Salesforce. And on the other end,
that's the wrong way to look at it. Sorry.
Yeah, you are right. That is the danger.
Sorry, but I that's the wrong way to look at it. I can elaborate on that when you're ready.
Yeah. The point is that I was looking for he would have some of the tools at his hand to get rid of some burning problems in the last 30 years, such as data quality. He has the customers, and he could do with smart CDP integration and getting data clean and keep them clean. But I haven't seen that. And he could add to the ROI analysis step by step in what AI utilization might deliver as a potential ROI. And now back to you, John. Going to the perspective,
well,
how or should you look at it?
So first of all, real quick on the data cleansing, AI can help there, but AI doesn't understand the context of data like a business user does. So it can't completely clean your data. It can't, because it can't point out, hey, these two names are actually the same customer and here's why. It can't do that stuff. You know, but I agree with you. There's more that you could do there, but it's just, let's not like fantasize that it can make all that go away, because it can't. But One thing I think is interesting is I did this thing on retail and AI, and someone said,
Mhm.
someone responded to me on Twitter/X and said, it's a game changer. And I said, no, it's not. And I said, and here's why. I said, because the whole approach to omni-channel commerce is the right approach, which is you want to serve the customer in whatever form they want, however they want, whatever channel they want, and you want to be able to have the dexterity to go from phone to store to any combination you want and show me where my stuff is and all this stuff, right? That's the right direction. If you can conquer those problems, then adding AI to the mix adds even more to that equation. But it's not some separate thing that comes along and makes you all this money. That's not how it works. And so, for example, I was at Salesforce Connections in the spring, and one thing I was really struck by was a company called Solo Brands, and they're using a WhatsApp channel now to interact with consumers in a new way through Salesforce. That's AI. It's a bot customer interaction, which is pretty bold, right? Like they're not. They escalate to humans, but there's some bot stuff going on there, right? Direct with the customer. How can Salesforce do that? Because Salesforce has worked really hard on the things I described earlier, on an architecture that focuses those conversations on the data issues for that customer and what they're looking for. And so it showed examples of like, I'm trying to figure out my patio setup and if this design will fit on my patio, and the bot's showing all this information. It's changing because, okay, it's for my family, so I show you something different than if it's just for you and you're living on your own. And all this stuff is useful and interesting, but keep in mind it's early days, right? So
Yeah.
you have one customer that's talking about this in an early stage of deployment. You're not going to get the shiny, exciting numbers that Ralph, that you're justifiably looking for here. You're not going to get that. But Salesforce is sitting on a gold mine, as Matthias says, of user data. And but it's all. I thought it was really interesting. I'll just read you this real quick thing the customer wrote, because they were talking about also augmented reality and how it fits in to all of this and AI. And what they said is one-to-one personalization, product recs, upsell, cross-sell, AR, putting it all in the context of the consumer buying process. It's not just one thing. It's all those things together. So it's not just some new co-pilot. It's how all the hard work you're doing to serve customers better with data comes together. And so people want this amazing stuff to happen with AI, but it's really just, it's an accelerant. So if you put it into a good process, it can make it better. If you put it into a bad process, it's going to make it shitty. So that's what it is. It's nothing more than that right now.
A flower bouquet, what you are describing to me, it's not a single piece of one, but it is the combination which makes it rise and shine and do the better.
I hope I didn't just ruin the Dreamforce keynotes, because I'm sorry, there's nothing coming along that's going to transform that. Now, what we're going to hear a lot about this fall is how agents are going to, change everything, but that I'm about to write about why that's bullshit. So, sorry to ruin the keynotes, but there's not going to be some dramatic breakthrough that makes all this real. But what I would hope for, if I'm a keynote watcher going into Dreamforce, is show us more customer stories like the one I just talked about with Solo Brands. Show us how brands are doing cool stuff. Because when I heard about you have a chatbot interacting directly with your customers, that did get my attention, because that can go wrong. And so I was impressed by that. And so do some stuff like that wakes up cynical people like me and says like, hey, this is actually working.
That's fantastic. And I just want to jump back to an earlier conversation we had with Michael Vu and the rest of the gang, that the people are sitting on those precious diamonds and they keep them in the treasure and do not show off or too openly their success stories yet, because they are afraid that they get too much copycats doing the same, and they want to first stabilize their way, have a clear path, and take the 3 to 6 months of advantage they would have towards competition to exploit a bit and go a bit in the direction to also show a bit in a good showcase of a return of invest in little steps. Yeah?
I think that's true, but that would be a poor excuse not to put customers on stage, because a lot of these forms of AI around predictive AI and personalization of commerce and stuff are not new and have been around for years. And you can certainly talk about those, even if certain generative AI experiments are not for public consumption yet. You can still talk about other stuff that builds towards that, because most of what customers, in my opinion, need to know right now is not what can I do today with AI, it's how can I get ready for AI with a better data infrastructure. Getting back to your data quality point, Ralph, how do I get to the point where my data is actually good enough so that I can actually do something useful when these tools come along?
I take a little different perspective on, yes, I do not expect the smashing keynotes, but if I'm curious in my territory that I have my heart for the SMBs with some built-in extra AI in the starter edition, I see there is step by step a little piece of good progress in future to be looked at and to be watched carefully. And I also do see that there are these usable little steps which are not the smashing bang bang. I have a question. Erika Mann, a very charming lady. Can you ask how the discussion between closed versus open AI systems, such as Erika has some relation to the European community, and she is a very smart lady on what's going on in Brussels and surroundings. So AI Act and the versions in the US and in Europe are some interesting aspects as open to closed AI systems. Gentlemen, your takes.
Yeah, I think they're really, really important, open AI systems, because I mean, the name implies something different, OpenAI, but it's actually a closed system. So, and I think we need more competition to Microsoft and to the Googles of this world and so on. So we actually so if you look at Meta, what they have done, so basically with the Llama model, bringing it out, apparently by accident, that's what they're claiming, but I think it was just a business strategy to be in the game. And now a lot of companies are using those systems. By the way, also Salesforce, that was interesting because I talked with Clara Shi about the compute demand and also energy demand of those systems. And she told me, yeah, so I mean, we often use smaller systems actually and different systems, and we still get good enough answers without using such a lot of compute systems or also energy. And I think, I mean, that strays a little bit away from the question, but I think the really big challenge is not chips or AI accelerator systems, but is the use of energy. And I've seen some estimates that at the end of the decade, it could be like 20% of all US energy consumption is going to be for data centers or for AI. And if you look at that, so that means we need, I think we're going to need in the short term more natural gas. So it's going to be more fossil fuel. I don't see it with renewable energies happen, and nuclear. I think it's not. You cannot build it out fast enough, and but sorry about that. Coming back to the question from America, yeah, I think. At least how I understand open and closed AI systems. So you can build a whole ecosystem of companies that are using something, and then you have the closed approach that OpenAI is following, and I think we need more competition in that space.
John.
Yeah, just real quick to add to that, I totally agree with everything Matthias said, and open systems are really important. There are some tricky things around regulating open source technologies and making sure, for example, that you can have access to those tools and not like stifle those tools. Although I'm in favor of AI regulation in general, if it's crafted smartly, sometimes you have to think about the implications of putting systems out into the wild, what bad actors will do with those systems, for example, and how can open source keep up when Microsoft and OpenAI have so much money to spend on regulatory compliance, with open source does not have. My impression of the EU AI Act is that it was pretty poor on those issues initially, but got better by the time it was ratified.
Yeah.
But that's something to really keep an eye on. But in general, the more customer choice around these tools, the better it's going to be, especially with transparency in the training sets, because that's one of the big problems with these closed systems is you have no idea how they're trained. And of course, in many cases, they're illegally, in my opinion, or at least unethically trained on copyrighted and owned materials that are not theirs. Open source systems have much more promise for companies that care about IP risk and stuff. They can say, well, we're using the system, we know how the system was trained, and all of that stuff I think is really important. From an energy consumption perspective, I do think there's some really important studies coming out right now on that, and it's pretty concerning stuff, and it's something we're going to really have to think about, because these systems right now are heavily dependent on massive data sets, and there's just no viable way that can scale on top of our climate change issues. Now, the good news is there's a lot of smart people working on different approaches to AI that don't require this kind of data consumption, and look at things like, using smaller models where you can to save money and infrastructure there, and then also other innovations. Because, so for example, the human brain is like 25 or 30 watt. We don't require a lot of energy, and we can make changes and adapt based on small pieces of information. We don't need massive data sets every time we learn something new. So you could argue that in some sense AI is a little bit on the wrong track here by being so dependent on massive data to make systems intelligent, because that's not how humans learn. And so some really smart data people and AI people are working on that and trying to figure that out, because in theory, if you learn more like humans, you don't need to consume as much data all the time. Now, of course, a lot of that data is front-loaded into our systems in different ways, but the point is there's new approaches that could take the heat off that, but this is a real concern on the energy side, and the data is out there now. There's some really good studies out on and also how much generative AI consumes versus even classical AI, like classical Google search AI versus generative AI search. It's striking the differences.
And you made at least one of our participating audience quite happy, such as she takes your perspectives, and that is me touching two topics we haven't touched so far. And I would run for the California AI Act, or that bill with that funny number 896. What for a German doesn't mean a thing, but it is that there are people driving forward in California, taking the lead, as they did it with the California Citizen Privacy Act as well, that they could be the role model of, we look at the European Communities AI Act and we see the not so smart approaches, but we need, if there is no regulation, but only self-regulation, such as trusted layers in Salesforce since 1 year, and some people which try to adapt to that as a blueprint, but others are in the wild, wild west, such as with Croc. So those are some gaps to be bridged. Gentlemen, what is your take? Where is the rebellion of the technology companies and shouting and screaming, you have not to regulate it, we will do it, and elsewise there will be no more innovation? Where is the truth? Where is the beef?
There is that. Mark Andreessen wrote a massive piece about that not long ago. So it's out there. Anyway, Matthias, let's hear your answer.
Yeah. I think I already can imagine John answer to it, because he already mentioned in the beginning he's kind of cynic regarding Silicon Valley, and I have to admit, I'm also a little bit after more than 20 years, because in the end, in the Silicon Valley, everybody talks about improving the world, but I think the first set of priorities is making money. It's always. Yeah. Nevertheless, what they are talking about, telling you, and what the marketing is it's about making money. And so it's funny because AI companies were actually demanding that there is regulation and that there should be done something. And now when California is taking up the ball and is doing something, so they're also complaining. But I guess even though I really, at my magazine, we believe in competition, and we believe in entrepreneurial competition, I think government also has to play a role. And it's often forgotten that so how massive the government had, or the taxpayer had actually helped Silicon Valley. I mean, going back to the 70s with the defense industry here in the Silicon Valley, then the internet, which came out of a military project. So I think that the taxpayer or the government, they have to have a say how things are developing. And I think the best is just to put in guardrails for everybody, and then also to come up with fines. So what happens if you basically create something that is dangerous? So how do you rectify that situation? Is there a kill switch or something like that? And I think we need that. It's otherwise, I mean, here in Silicon Valley, so basically, I think Meta had that, or Facebook for years. It was like, just do something and then deal with the consequences later. And that worked in the past. I think with AI, how it is developing, I mean, there could be the way of no return, that you create something, it's out in the world, and then it's being misused. And even though we are in a competition with China, I mean, always the argument with China comes up. But even with China, I think China, they will also put in guardrails, because they also see the danger if something goes wrong, that you don't have a kill switch, you cannot basically return it. And so I think it's very important that there is regulation. The question is how overreaching is that regulation, and how do you make room for innovation? And I think they're going to figure that out. I'm pretty sure that's going to be a back and forth between the politicians and the AI companies here in California.
Well, and just real quick, the EU AI Act is a better test of stronger regulation than what's shaping up in California. And Ralph, to your point around why these vendors aren't crying about regulation, well, they figured out how to influence it all behind the scenes. That bill is significantly watered down from how it first started, and look no further than backdoor lobbying. In order, and this is how these things happen. And there are some important whistleblower protections that remain in this bill, but the bottom line is the way this bill is set up now, it's mostly going to be fines after the fact. And a lot of these companies view these fines as just the cost of doing business. I'm not saying that California shouldn't pass something, but this is not the true test of like tough regulation versus innovation. That's bullshit. This is a minor bill as far as regulatory issues are concerned. The thing I would say is that airlines are regulated, so AI's got to be regulated. End of story. AI's going to have more impact on transportation than airlines in the long run. So just stop crying about regulation and just face up to the fact that you're going to be regulated, and let's just get on with it. Do airlines cry about regulation? Sometimes, but they accept the fact that they're regulated, and AI companies are going to have to accept this too. I'm sorry, just face it. Now let's get to work on making better regulations that make sense and start there.
And therefore, you have to have at least a starting point. And as you said, the UI, the GDPR was one thing. The EU AI Act is working to its way, and it is still 2 years till everything has to be put in place. Yep. So there will be a learning curve as well. And I would like to close up and finalize our fruitful and speedy discussion on the very simple normative things, such as a daily user of a car. John, do you have a car, and what type of car you have?
I have a 2018 RAV4. I'm going to hold on to it for as long as I can, and I'm not going to let AI into my car. Though I would welcome a couple of driver assist functions if I could get those.
Yeah. And now over to Matthias testing Tesla.
Yeah, it's funny. We actually, so when we came to the States in 1998, I was joking about the Americans having so many cars, and now we have like 3 cars. And because, yeah, with public transportation, it's a real challenge here as opposed to Europe. But I have a Tesla 2018 Model 3, and because I write about the industry, so I have to be knowledgeable when writing about it. Of course, I upgraded to the so-called self-driving system, and yeah, it's a mixed bag. So sometimes the car is trying to kill me. Sometimes I think I'm going to die of road rage because other drivers around me, so they get kind of enraged when the car waits too long at an intersection. So for me, it's still a long way out. So I don't see how Elon Musk can basically. So let's say on the highway, it's like 95%. It's correct. Inner city, I would say 90%. It's doing the right decision, but the remaining 10 or 5%, that's going to be pretty hard. And I don't see it, how he's going to solve the problems in the next 2 or 3 years with only cameras.
Well, remember that Elon Musk promised in 2017 a Tesla would drive unassisted between Los Angeles and New York. So Elon Musk's credibility when it comes to AI development is completely it's non-existent. So
yeah, good point, John. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There is very publicly known gentleman who is doing a lot of explaining science to children and to other people, and he does it in a more serious way for the grown-ups, Ranga Yogeshwar. Mm-hmm. And Ranga Yogeshwar did do 3 years ago a very informative, only shown at late evening, better early night show where he was critically reflecting the status of AI and where it is moving. And when it comes to driving, he said, we're not even in the baby shoes. And it's still, there are some systems which are assisting, it's fair enough, but to trust the system to drive you towards a very calm and safe approach, it's not yet there.
Well, remember that modern AI has an outlier problem, and the more dangerous the outliers, the more you have to be careful about your use cases. And what's more dangerous than the outliers you can encounter on unpredictable urban driving environments? You know, what could you possibly run into that the system hasn't seen before? That's why you can flummox these cars by just putting pylons on the roof of the cars, because they didn't think of that. The designers weren't like, what if some protesters put pylons on our cars, you know? And suddenly the cars go nuts. And that's like a safe example of this problem. So it's a fascinating journey we're on.
He was claiming in his article the plastic bag, which was lying on the road and made him to a full stop brake, emergency braking. That is killing the fun. Yeah. And just to give one example, to take it to the famous last word in the wrap up, because we have reached the hour already, and I was so fascinated. I just saw it, that my wife is always claiming what she doesn't like in AI is that financial companies, banks and insurances do throw your data into a model, and you are decided to get no longer a credit or a loan for your house, and they do not explain you what is the finding, what is in the algorithm that comes to that decision. They keep it closed. They make it not a quiz show, such as give me a guess, but it's simply under closed doors. And this is something we need to change by fast, because this is a problem from my perspective, and I would like to have your takes on that, that we need to rearrange, make it more transparent. Matthias.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we already talked about open system versus closed systems, and a lot of those systems are black boxes. And when I'm talking to some experts, they even admit that some of the things they cannot explain why the system is behaving this way. And I think we need something like explainable AI in the future. So basically that we actually know to a certain extent why it is coming up with those recommendations, especially in terms of bias. And it's not only, I've read that there's a study claiming that human resource departments are now using Gen AI actually to look at people applying for the job, and then somehow they are preferring male versus female applicants and something like that. And the example you brought, Ralph, is if I get a mortgage or not. I mean, that is so important also for society and also for your own financial development. I think it has to be explained. And that comes back to the point that also John said, we need regulation like we have for the airline industry and for a lot of other, also for the financial industry as well. So we need that also in Gen AI. We have to know why it is coming to those decisions, especially if it impacts real humans and the fate of humans. So we need that.
John.
100% agree. Just real quick, these tools definitely lack an inherent explainability, which is a problem. But a bigger portion of the problem, Ralph, is poor deployments that are poorly designed, that don't have any kind of recourse, human escalation and review. Because even if the AI makes a poor decision, if you can appeal that decision and a human can correct that decision, then you've essentially curbed some of the abuse of that system. And so some of this goes on organizations for implementing flawed technology in dumb ways. And the EU AI Act is important here in the sense that they categorized risk areas. And loans is obviously a very, very high risk area. So anyone who goes into implementing AI in a loan or algorithmic screening, or as Matthias said, a hiring decision, that's a high risk area, and you should be subject to scrutiny for that. And you should realize we're designing high risk systems right now. We have to put in a ton of safeguards. And I don't think a lot of companies think of it that way. They think of it more like, oh yeah, we could save a lot of money on this. We could do a headcount reduction. We could do this and that. And we're so much more efficient in how we process loans now, and blah, 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 blah. It's like, just stop it. You know, like, anyway.
Gentlemen, that was our CRM Convo for today. That hour was one of the fastest which flew by this year, and I enjoyed it very, very much with that very special double feature.
Cool.
To our audience, thank you very much for being with us this week. And guys, I can tell you the numbers which are showing me to my screen make me positively cry. This is positively embarrassing how many live viewers we still have on now. And I guess we will have a fantastic long tail perception of our discussion. Thank you, Matthias, and thank you, John. John, for joining in and jumping by. Sure. Matthias, for your very, very charming observations, and with your general approach of taking the perspective you are taking as a German journalist in a foreign country and looking into a broader perspective to stuff. Tune in, dear audience, next week when we would like to dive into the myths on customer satisfaction indices during the customer journey. We have a study and its result, which we would like to discuss with Thomas Meyer-Imwald from Question Pro. And I guess that will be an interesting ride as well as this was, as he is challenging NPS and other stuff and targeting of audience and customer experience with the support of AI. And that will be an interesting one. Ladies and gentlemen, dear audience, dear guests, it was fabulous. And I will take us now backstage. Thank you very much. Take care. And to my dear friends, stay safe and looking forward to next Tuesday.